Hi, everyone, and I am back with words of encouragement from Babylon as we travel through the book of Daniel and pull encouragements from his time and his friends' time in exile. And today we are on Daniel chapter 3, and I am reading from the NIV version. The image of gold and the blazing furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there were some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? And I've read Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through verse 15. So when we recap Daniel chapter 2, we know that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And in this dream, there was this huge statue. And then there was this rock that was thrown and crushed the foot of the statue. And it was not thrown by human hands, which we established that was God establishing his kingdom. Because Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar that the head of gold and all of the different parts of the statue represented different kingdoms. And when the statue fell, other kingdoms would rise. But God's everlasting kingdom would eventually rule over all, and it would never be destroyed. So you would think that Nebuchadnezzar would take heed and know that dream was a warning. No, He did not take heed. He decided to build the statue. And not only did he decide to build the statue, he made it a requirement for everyone to bow down to the statue. He wanted the people to worship him. He didn't want earned reverence. He wanted forced reverence. He was going to force them to bow down and worship this golden image. And if they didn't, he was going to kill them. This also makes me think about when we go back to Daniel chapter 1. When Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel was taken into captivity, they were forced into training and study for 3 years to be in service to the king. And part of that training was to learn Babylonian customs and Babylonian literature and teaching them Babylonian religion. And so Nebuchadnezzar automatically assumed that you've been training. I've trained you about my gods. You are supposed to worship my gods. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was like, no, we're going to stick with our God, the true and living God. And so Nebuchadnezzar calls them forward and is like, hey, I hear that you are not bowing to the image. So I'm going to give you another chance to prove to me that you're going to worship the way that I say worship. And we'll see tomorrow as we continue through this chapter that they're going to be like, no, that's not what we're going to do. That's not the route that we want to take. So what is the encouragement from Daniel chapter 3 verses 1 through 15? Because this is before we get to the good part of the chapter. What you can take away from these verses is that you can be in Babylon. You can be in the midst of your hard season, in your season of exile. And you can learn how to survive during that season. You can learn the culture of that season, but you don't have to align yourself with it. You don't have to let it change who you are. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken into captivity, their names were changed, which meant that they were trying to change their identity, and they had to learn the customs. 3 years of training. That's an associate's degree and a little extra. So just because you're going through a hard season does not mean you have to become what the hard season is trying to make you into. You can still stay with God. You can still hold on to your identity, and you can still hold on to your faith. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were determined to hold on to their faith. They had already been promoted once when Daniel said that they didn't want to eat the king's food, and they thrived because they chose the path that God had put them on, and they survived. And you can survive. That's my takeaway from this first part of this chapter, is that it doesn't matter the season that you're in. You can adjust and survive in that season, but it does not have to change your faith. It does not have to change who you are. And it does not have to change how you act. If you were faithful to God on the mountaintop and when everything was going well, be faithful to God in the hard season. Be faithful to God when you have to face the furnace. So I know that that's easier said than done, because sometimes the trials get so hard and you be like, okay, God, I need you to show up for me right now, because I don't know if I can face this alone. And as we continue through this chapter, we're going to see they won't have to face it alone, and neither will you in your season of Babylon, your hard season. So I hope this encourages you, and come back tomorrow as we continue through Daniel chapter 3.